What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you guys are having a pretty good spring break. I know in some places in the Northern Hemisphere, some of y'all are already enjoying your spring break. I, too, am enjoying my spring break, hence the lack of uploads, although there are other things that are playing a role on this. But spring break is here for a lot of us in this hemisphere. And, you know, what better way to spend spring break than to just go to the beach or perhaps go to the movies with your friends and see what's out there. Oscars just happened last month, which I don't give a fuck about anymore, although I do plan on watching the Best Picture winner, Anora. I've heard many good things about it. But today we're going to be focusing on what just launched last weekend, which we know this film has been a hot topic for a couple of years now. Before its release, we saw teaser images about it, we saw leaked behind the scenes of it, we saw interviews about it, a lot of which are very controversial in their own right, which may be contributing to how it's performing in the box office as of today, and why that might be the case. So today, folks, we're gonna be talking about Snow White. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs live-action remake, or Snow White and the Seven Different Heighted People, or Snow White and the Seven Woke CGI weird-looking characters with slight deformations, I suppose, is the new theme of this. So this movie just launched last weekend, and right now, it is not doing too well. I mean, we're talking, as of recording, 1.8 out of 10 on IMDb. 40% Rotten Tomatoes, and I'm not entirely sure how much it's making on the box office. But right now, it's not doing too great. You know, one of the original Disney movies, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, movie's a fucking classic, and, you know, as a 23-year-old, almost 24-year-old, still tend to enjoy it every now and again. Like, you know, even 80 plus years from then, it's still a pretty good movie for what it is, and it's still one of those movies that you get to enjoy with your family. Some of your kids, if you're a parent, or if you are an uncle or an aunt, you can watch it with your nephews and nieces. Like, even to this day, it is such a perfect family movie to watch with everybody. You know, being one of the OG Disney animated films out there. So of course Disney, modern Disney, does what they do, and they decided to make a live action version of it. And if you're already familiar with live action remakes, they are never better than the original animated film. If anything, sometimes they end up becoming much worse than the original animated film, even going as far as, you know, spewing out memes every now and again. Oh, that's hot. That is hot. But, you know, box office-wise, it's usually hit or miss. You know, sometimes they do pretty decently, other times they do pretty horribly, for those same obvious reasons. Nobody really gives a fuck about live-action remakes. And that's pretty much what we're seeing with Snow White here, especially one of the original Disney animated films. And, you know, it's bad enough that some of these live-action remakes that Disney makes are never really good. They're always worse than the original animated film. This one right here is no exception. And with what we've been seeing years before when this was first announced, and even with like some of the behind the scenes that we saw with the actors who were supposed to play the Seven Dwarfs, you know, it's really hard to refer to some of these people as dwarves when they look pretty goddamn tall and they're all in different random heights. You remember that picture? You know, the picture of the actors that were supposed to play all the dwarves in this Snow White film, and they were all in like different heights, and people were like freaking out as why this was the case. Turns out people didn't really like that, and it was just wildly inaccurate from the original story, so they had to instead make CG animated versions of those seven dwarfs and have the same actors voice them instead. So that was one of the first controversies that came out of the production of Snow White, the live action Snow White I'm talking about here. Woke Snow White, as a lot of people have been calling it. And another controversy that spewed out of this movie is that the actress that plays Snow White Rachel Zegler, didn't even like Snow White, never even liked the character. And during some of these like actor strikes, she was going around and going to these interviews, and she was talking about being tapped for the role of Snow White. And she goes out and she makes all these claims like, yeah, this is not the 1930s anymore, so we're going to give it more of like a modern edge to one of the original Disney classics, one of the original Disney stories, the animated films. Like, we're not going to go by the original story that actually was a real fairy tale from literally hundreds of years ago. She's not going to get rescued by the prince. The prince was supposedly a stalker, so we're just gonna go out and completely change the story at its entirety. And there you go. That's gonna be the new live-action remake of Snow White. And, there's even clips of her, saying all of this, which I will show you briefly right here.
I know that you've told me before that your version of Snow White is different, and it's more of a 2022 version of Snow White. What did you mean by that?
I mean, the original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird.
Super weird.
So we didn't do that this time.
So no prince, or a different kind of prince?
We have a different approach to what I'm sure a lot of people will assume is a love story, just because we cast a guy in the movie.
Right.
Andrew Burnap, great dude.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that I think everyone's going to have their assumptions about what it's actually going to be, but it's really not about the love story at all, which is really, really wonderful. And whether or not she finds love along the way is anybody's guess until 2024. All of Andrew's scenes could get cut. Who knows? It's Hollywood, baby. But it's...
You said you were bringing a modern edge to it on stage. What do you mean by that?
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be, and the leader that her late father told her that she could be if she was fearless, fair, brave, and true. And so it's just a really incredible story for, I think, young people everywhere to see themselves in.
Snow White is running for president.
I'm launching my campaign.
Alright, so as you can see from some of these clips, she claims to have been I guess scared of some Snow White adaptation, and during the production of this movie was constantly going on tour, going on to these interviews, and talking about the prince basically was a creepy stalker in the original movie. Weird. And we're not going to do that. And she's also not going to be rescued by that said prince. And we've essentially Jurassically transmogrified the story at its entirety. So it's no longer a story of Snow White happens to be very fair, and she is the fairest of them all, and there's this jealous, witchy, evil old lady who is the queen and who really hates her because of that, and so she poisons her, and everyone is sad and whatnot, and then she gets liberated by the prince, and he, along with an army of dwarves, then defeats the evil queen. They fall in love, and everyone lives happily ever after. That's not going to be the story this time. This time, it's the story of how she can take initiative, and she's the one true leader, and she realizes her inner power and her leadership capability, and she's going to be the one being the true leader of the story. So I would imagine, based on what we know, based on some of the teaser trailers that we saw originally, including the trailers with some of the creepy, almost hyper-realistic looking CGI dwarfs that we just saw. I obviously did not watch the movie, so I have no clue how it goes, but I would imagine that the story is that Snow White is captured by the queen, or witch, and then gets imprisoned, or something like that, and then she escapes, and then, she's all cut up about it, but then, later in the movie, she realizes that she really is the fair one, and she is the one that will rule them all. She's the Eye of Sauron, basically. And the prince, instead of being the one that rescues her, is then instead just a simple sidekick and nothing more. And so once she finds out that she really is the fairest of them all, she then rallies up an army of dwarves and like marches on the queen's castle and then defeats the queen, and then she becomes the new queen. That's probably my guess. So completely and totally different from the original animated story. And judging by how it's doing right now from some of these IMDb reviews, I really don't think that many people really enjoy this new modern adaptation of Snow White. I am not the only one who expected the egregious failure of this movie. I mean, knowing what they already did to the original story, knowing the controversies that led up to the first trailer of the movie and up until now, and of course, the iffy off-the-wall track record that Disney has with their live-action remakes, 1.8 out of 10, 40% Rotten Tomatoes. I mean, I don't think I was the only one who predicted that this would be the outcome out of it. 1.8 out of 10 is abysmal. Like, I do my G Fuel reviews, and I always give that 0 out of 10 scale that I use when I'm reviewing these flavors. You know, I always give them a decimal while I'm at it too. But 1.8 out of 10 possible points, I mean, that is just, I mean, it's not like 0 out of 10, but still, a movie that is rated that low is just absolutely egregious. Like, the lead up to this movie with how bad it was and how bad it looked, I'm just not surprised to see this result come out of this Snow White movie. And again, I am not the only one who predicted this. And in fact, here's a little bit of a hot take. Now, obviously, I do not believe in like hate watching movies that you're probably not going to like anyway. So like the Ghostbusters reboot. I was never a super fan of the Ghostbusters anyway, but it was pretty evident that it wasn't going to work. When you saw teasers for it, when you saw the first trailer of it, it really didn't make any sense. I don't think there was any controversies leading up to it, besides how poorly the first trailer did, but when the reboot first came out, it did awful. It was pretty evident. Again, it was just not going to work. This movie, however, is probably going to be one for the legend books, to the point where it might even become a weird periodic cult classic 15, 20 years from now. And I might actually watch this one. No, seriously, I might actually would. No, maybe it's probably playing right now this weekend. I'll check the Fandango and see if I can get tickets. I totally would. Let's go and get tickets this weekend just so we can go and watch woke Snow White in the theaters. That's what I want to do. What a perfect way to spend a weekend. I'll probably be the only one in that movie theater since pretty much nobody gives a fuck about it anyway. Or instead might be surrounded by a handful of cyber zoomers and, you know, some totally weird fucking people. I'm sure that I'll be welcome among the crowd that would be interested in watching that movie. Anyways, either way, it could end up becoming a cult classic though. And I'll look at it like this. If a movie is going to be good long run. So we're not talking box office. It'll flop there. Again, looking at all these initial ratings and reviews, this movie is not doing too well, and it's not going to do too well. It'll flop in the box office. It'll be wiped off the face of the earth. Long term, though, you either have to have a really good, unique idea, good acting and stuff, good lore, good characters, good cinema score and whatnot, and it has to be really good overall. Or you can go in the opposite direction and it's fucking terrible. Look at Troll 2, for example, which definitely never made a profit in the movie theaters, but people still enjoy. Like, there's a cult following for that movie. They even have like get-togethers and shit with the original cast, and people go to that. Look at some of the like the mid area, like Jason 5 or something like that. People still go to see those actors and actresses too. A perfect example, or rather, the perfect example of a movie disaster that became a cult classic, you probably already know what I'm talking about here, is Tommy Wiseau's The Room. The worst movie ever made and the biggest disaster in cinema history. And somehow it gained a cult following, with repeated viewings, dialogue quoting, and audience participation, throwing spoons every time a plastic spoon is found. People actually liked the movie The Room because of how bad it is, and they partake in these meetups and events, and it's what led to The Disaster Artist being created, written and directed by Mark himself.
Oh, hi, Mark.
These movies end up becoming popular because the movies are so unintentionally hilarious because they're so goddamn fucking terrible. Now, the fact that Disney dropped so much money on this kind of cheapens the likelihood of that happening. However, there is still the off chance that this becomes a cult classic. Not because of how historically awful it's going to end up being, it might even become worse than The Room, but simply because they took a classic Disney movie, one of the very first really good Disney movies, the original Walt Disney creation. Walt himself didn't even want this movie to be remade, to the point where he famously trashed the idea of having a sequel. But Disney still took their founder's biggest and best creation, arguably his most prized possession, completely got rid of the plot, totally overhauled it, changed the story entirely, and wokeified it. And in the end, because of all of those reasons, no matter how bad this movie will do in the short term, it could still end up becoming a cult classic, because 10, 15, or 20 years from now, people would be remembering the entrance of this generation into filmmaking and say, oh, you remember the time they tried to make all those shitty live-action remakes? Remember how they tried to inject wokeness into literally everything? Which, by then, those two things will be outdated concepts. It would almost kind of be nostalgic by then. People will be nostalgic for the Minecraft movie, which I will be making my own video about. But, again, people being nostalgic for the live-action Minecraft movie, or the Sonic movies, being nostalgic for Woke Little Mermaid, and Woke Snow White, and all these other shitty live-action remakes. But yeah, looking at the views of Snow White, it's not looking too great, and to be fair, I pretty much expected to see this happen. With all the stuff and the controversies that were coming out of it before the movie was launched, while it was in production, all of these things leading up to it, it's just not surprising to see this movie do poorly. And, I just wanted to talk about it since a lot of people seem to be talking about it already, especially on X, so just wanted to share my own thoughts about it. Just a little random one-off thing for spring break just to talk about. So either way, with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to hit that like button down below. And if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the little notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on all my social medias. Links are in the description below, including and especially to my X, formerly known as Twitter. That is where I'm the most active. Share this video around with your friends, families, boyfriends, girlfriends, enemies, whomever. Definitely helps me out a lot, helps the video grow, and helps grow the channel if you were to share this video and this channel with whomever you know. And of course, as always, at the end of every video, I love to pass the conversation right back down to you. So let me know what you guys think. Do you think the hate that Snow White is getting is warranted? Do you think all this is unnecessary? Do you think it deserves all the hate that it's getting? Have you watched it yet? Do you plan on watching it in the future? Again, as always, forgot to mention it earlier on, but I do love to pass the conversation back to you at the end of every video. So don't forget to leave all your thoughts in the comment section down below as always. But anyways, either way, like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and until then, I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, talk soon, you're awesome.